You wake up, it's dark, your scalp itches, and you can't figure out why. You try to scratch it, but your hand won't move. There's something around your wrist, so you try the other hand, and it's the same thing. You turn your head, and there's a window, and through the window you see yellow taxis on routes. You're in New York, and then you see a woman in purple, standing at the foot of your bed, just watching you. She has a Jamaican accent, and for a half second you kind of think it's the person who used to babysit you when you were a kid. But your babysitter hasn't been in your life for 20 years. So why would she be here? You ask her, "Where are you?" She says, "Hospital." You ask her, "Why am I tied down?" She doesn't know. She just starts very slowly undoing the strap on your wrist, and as she does, you reach up to scratch your scalp, and your finger hits fabric. There's a cap on your head. You rip it off, and underneath there are wires. Dozens of wires glued to your skull, snaking down behind the bed into some machine you can't see. You start pulling them off one by one, and the purple lady's saying something, but you can't hear because you've noticed the band on your wrist. It's thick orange plastic with black blocky letters. It says flight risk. Now hold on, because if you're confused right now, so is the woman who is strapped to this hospital bed. She has no idea how she got here, she has no idea what day it is, and she has no idea why there are wires in her hair and why her childhood babysitter is here, or why her wrists are tied to the bed. This woman is a 24-year-old reporter at the New York Post, and 3 weeks ago, she was at her desk in Midtown Manhattan filing a copy on a deadline. 2 weeks ago, she was at a Ryan Adams concert with her boyfriend. But that's all she remembers. She doesn't remember the week before or even what's happened this week. How did she get here? All she knows is that lying in this bed with this orange band on her wrist is something that is very, very wrong. And nobody knows, not the doctors, not her parents, not her boyfriend, not the most respected neurologist in New York City can tell her what is happening. This is the story of Susannah Cahalan and the month that she lost, the doctors who couldn't bring her back, and the answer that almost came too late. So to understand what was taken from her, you have to understand who she was. Susannah grew up in Summit, New Jersey, a comfortable suburb an hour outside the city. Her parents split up when she was a teenager 8 years before our story begins, and both eventually remarried. Her mom stayed in Summit and remarried a man named Alan. Her dad moved across the river to a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights with a woman named Giselle, who Susannah doesn't really know at all. Her dad's a private type, the kind of guy who doesn't even tell his kids he got married until after the fact. She has a younger brother named James, 5 years younger, and the two of them are close. After high school, Susannah went out to St. Louis for college at Washington University, where she studied journalism. But the Post was already in her blood by then. She'd been interning at the paper since she was 17. Summers, breaks, sorting mail, and fetching coffee is what they called a copy kid. The kind of low-rung newsroom job where you make yourself useful and pray that somebody notices. And someone did, because by the time she graduated and moved back east, they hired her full-time. She was now a real reporter with her own desk and her own byline. And she would keep every single one of her clippings, every story she'd ever published, going all the way back to her teenage internship days, cut out of the paper and stacked in her apartment. It was kind of like a monument to her own becoming. She was proud of it. So by the spring of 2009, she's living the kind of version of New York City where most people who move there hope to find. A tiny studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen, a pull-out sofa for a bed, the whole place the size of a walk-in closet. And she loves it. It's the first apartment she's ever had on her own. She has a boyfriend named Steven, 7 years older, and they've only been dating for about 4 months. But they've known each other for 6 years. And the whole thing has this early stage shimmer to where everything feels slightly too good to be real. And everyone who knows her back then describes her the same way: ambitious, social, and fast. The kind of person who walks fast on sidewalks, laughs loud in restaurants, and stays out a little too late, but somehow still files her copy on time the next morning. She drinks wine with her friends. She texts Steven from Cavs at 2 a.m. She is a happy-go-lucky 24-year-old juggling a bustling career and a blooming relationship. Sunday dinners when everyone can swing it, phone calls home to the family when she can. I mean, she is, by every measure, living her best life. Until one morning in late January, she wakes up and notices 2 small red dots on her left arm. It's a Monday morning, just like any other. New York washed out winter light pouring into the window. Suzanne wakes up, she rolls over, throws her arm across the pillow, and that's when she sees them. 2 small red dots on her left forearm, right next to each other, an inch apart. She sits up, looks closer. They look like 2 bites. Now, if you've ever lived in New York, you might know exactly what's going on in her head. Because in January of 2009, this is the peak of the city bedbug panic. It's on every news station and every paper, including hers. The Post has been running stories about it for months. Apartment buildings have been fumigated, mattresses piling up on curbs, hotels are getting sued, and whole blocks of the city are being treated like quarantine zones. And now Susannah is sitting on her pull-out sofa, looking at these 2 red dots on her arm. She does what any reasonable New Yorker would do. She calls an exterminator. A few hours later, he's in her apartment with a flashlight. He pulls back the sheets, he flips the mattress, he gets down on his hands, his knees, and runs the flashlight along the pull-out, the baseboards, the corners of the closet, the edges of the rug. He spends a long time on it. He stands up, he looks at her dead in the eye, and says, "There are no bugs. There's no infestation, there's no evidence, and he's been doing this for years, and he's telling her professionally that her apartment is clean." She thanks him, she pays him, and then even though he just told her there's nothing to worry about, she books him to come back in 2 days and spray the whole apartment anyways, top to bottom. She hangs up the phone and looks around her studio, and she starts to feel this crawling, prickling sense that something is in or on her skin. In her hair, under her clothes, she scratches her arm, and the spot where the 2 bites are start to itch worse. She has 2 days until the exterminator comes back, but she has no time to sit and search for her apartment because she has work to do. She walks a few blocks from her apartment to the Post in Midtown, and the whole way there, she's thinking about the bites. What to do with the apartment between now and Wednesday when the exterminator comes back. About whether she should sleep at Steven's tonight just to be safe. About whether Steven's apartment is also a risk. Whether she's already brought bugs to the office on her coat. So she walks into the newsroom and slides into her seat, and next to her is her best friend at the paper, Angela. It's loud, it's cluttered, there are Yankees mugs and stacks of newspapers and people yapping on phones, half shouting. Her friend Angela describes it as a bar without the alcohol. And Susannah loves it. She leans over to Angela, almost embarrassed, and says, "Hey, do you know anything about bedbug bites?" Angela kind of laughs it off, scoots away in her chair, but before Susannah can show her the bites on her arm, her phone rings. She looks at her screen, it's Steven, the Sunday editor, Steven. And her stomach drops through the floor because every Tuesday, every single Tuesday, for the last however many months, every reporter at the Post who writes for the Sunday edition has the same standing meeting with Steve on Tuesdays. You walk into his office, you pitch 3 story ideas, you fight for the ones you want to write, and you walk out with assignments. It's the rhythm of the entire week, it's the whole job, and it's Tuesday morning. She didn't prep, she didn't write down ideas, she didn't even remember it was Tuesday. She has nothing. She walks down the hall to Steve's office, she sits down, Steve's looking at her, waiting, and she opens her mouth. And what comes out is, "I saw something on a blog." That's her pitch. Steve doesn't even let her finish. He cuts her off saying, "Don't ever come to this office again with nothing prepared." She nods, she gets up, she walks back down the hall to her desk, past Angela, past the other reporters, and she sits down. And she sits there for a long time, just staring at her keyboard, trying to understand how she could possibly have forgot Tuesday. She's worked at this paper since she was 17 years old. She has never in her life forgot what a Tuesday is all about. She works the rest of the day in a fog. She doesn't talk to Angela, she doesn't try to make up for the meeting, she just sits at her desk and pushes through whatever's in front of her until it's dark. She knows the exterminator is coming back, so she has to prepare. She then walks home, gets to her apartment, takes off her coat, and starts going through everything methodically, room by room, though it's a studio apartment, so it's really just one room and a bathroom. But she goes through everything with a roll of black trash bags and starts filling them. Anything the bugs could be hiding goes in the trash bags. Pillows, throw blankets, the cushions off the pull-out sofa, a stack of old magazines, books, all of it into the bag. She works her way around the apartment, and at some point she gets to the corner where she keeps her stack of clippings. Every story she's ever published, going all the way back to when she was 17 years old, fetching coffee at the Post and begging anyone with a byline to let her tag along on a piece. The thing she is the most proudest of in the world. She picks up the top one, she pauses. It's the Michael Devlin story. Now, the Devlin case was about a man who kidnapped 2 boys in Missouri, held them for years. It was a national story, front page news, and Susannah had landed the interview. Her words on the front page of the New York Post. It was the biggest story of her career. She holds it for a second, and then she drops it into the trash bag. And then the next clipping, and the next, and the next, and she doesn't slow down. She doesn't pull any of them out, she just keeps feeding them into the trash bag. Every story she's ever written, until the stack is gone, and the bag is full, and there's nothing left in the corner where her career used to live. She ties the top of the trash bag in a knot, and she puts it by the door with the others, and tomorrow, before the exterminator comes, she'll carry them all down to the curb. She stands up, she stretches, and she's scanning the room for other possible bedbug hiding spots, when suddenly a sharp pain flashes through her head. Sudden surge of pain, like a needle is stabbing behind her eye. She doesn't know what's going on, and she stumbles to bed hoping that this passes by the morning. And it does pass. By morning, the headache is gone. And for a few days, life almost looks normal again. The exterminator came back, sprayed the apartment, and left just like the bites on her arm. She goes to work, she writes her stories, she tells herself that maybe she just needed sleep. So now it's Saturday morning, and she's at her boyfriend's apartment. The 2 of them have spent the night together, and now he's gotten up early for band practice. She's still in bed, waking up to the quiet still around her. She glances over and notices his laptop sitting on the nightstand. And out of nowhere, she's hit with the thought, I want to read his emails. She's never had this thought before in her life. She's not the jealous type of girlfriend. She has never gone through a partner's stuff. She doesn't even like the idea of going through a partner's stuff. She and Steven have only been together for 4 months, and she trusts him completely. They have an easy, honest relationship, and yet here she is, sitting up in his bed, pulling his laptop into her lap and going through it. She tells herself that she's just gonna look for a minute so she can feel at ease. So she opens his inbox and starts scrolling, and she finds emails from an ex-girlfriend. They're from over a year ago. Steven never wrote back to most of them. What she finds in his inbox is nothing to suggest he's done anything wrong, but she keeps reading anyways. She reads every email between them, every back and forth. She zooms in on photos, she checks the dates, she reads them a second time, and then she gets out of bed and walks over to his dresser. She opens the top drawer. She doesn't know what she's looking for. She's just looking for anything to justify her feelings. She goes through all the drawers, top and bottom, and in one of them, she finds a small box. Inside the box are old letters, photographs, and mementos from past relationships going back years. She sits down on the floor of his bedroom and starts going through them one by one, taking her time to examine each moment. But now, something on the wall grabs her attention, and she happens to look up at a mirror across the room, staring at her own reflection. A woman sitting on her boyfriend's bedroom floor, rifling through his private things spread out around her. She's looking at this strange woman in the mirror, and then a thought pops into her head. I don't act like this. Something is wrong with me. She shakes herself out of it and stands up. She looks at her phone. It's been 2 hours. She's been going through Steven's belongings for 2 hours. She had thought it was only 10 minutes, maybe 20 tops, but no, it's been 2 hours and they're gone. She cannot account for them. She snaps out of it and begins frantically putting the room back the way it was so Steven would never know. And as she's doing so, her left hand begins to tingle. That sort of pins and needles feeling you get when your hand falls asleep. She shakes the hand back, hoping the blood would go back, flexes her fingers, rubbing it against her leg, but nothing is working. It's getting worse. By the time she finishes putting Steven's room back together, that tingling feeling has spread up her arm. Her fingers won't close right, and by the time she gets back to her own apartment, the whole left side of her body was beginning to get that tingling feeling. She sits on her couch and she starts staring at her own limp hand in her lap, and by this time she's even more frightened than she's ever been by anything that's happened so far. So she does something that she's been avoiding for a week and a half. She picks up the phone and calls her doctor, specifically her gynecologist, Dr. Rothstein. He's the only doctor in her life that she has a close relationship with. He's more like a friend. She tells him about the numbness. She tells him about the pins and needles. She doesn't tell him about the bedbugs or the clippings or the missed meeting at work or sitting on Steven's bedroom floor for 2 hours going through his mementos, just the hand. And at the other end of the line, Dr. Rothstein's voice changes. That friendly tone leaves, and he gets quiet and focused. He asks her a few more questions, and she can hear him quickly pulling up his contacts. Numbness on one side of her body in a healthy 24-year-old is not something a gynecologist is going to handle. He gets her same day with a neurologist, a man named Dr. Bailey. Dr. Bailey is one of the most respected neurologists in New York City. His office is in a Manhattan building with a marble lobby. The waiting room has these strange, oversized, abstract paintings on the wall. She fills out an intake form, and the medical history section is almost completely blank besides a prior with melanoma. She had it removed, she's 24, and she is healthy. Dr. Bailey calls her in, she tells her symptoms, and he runs the standard neurological exam. Reflexes, coordination, the little flashlight in the eyes. He has her walk a straight line. He has her squeeze his fingers, pushed against his hands, resist his pressure. Everything looks normal. Everything is starting to feel normal too. The numbness has actually faded a little since she got there. But Dr. Bailey doesn't dismiss her. He orders blood work, he orders an MRI, he tells her they'll get to the bottom of it. She's greeted by the MRI tech, and that MRI tech begins chatting her up while she changes into her gown. She has to take off all her jewelry, including a gold ring her mother gave her. It's her lucky ring. She's worn it for years. She folds her clothes, sets the ring on top of a pile, and walks into the MRI room. 45 minutes later inside the machine, the clanging, the banging, the magnetic groan of the scanner, she comes out. She gets dressed in a hurry because this chatty tech is hovering there, and she leaves as fast as she can. She's now halfway home before she realizes she forgot that ring. But she doesn't go back for it. She means to call for it, but she doesn't seem to make herself pick up the phone. And days will pass, then weeks, and the ring will sit in that office, forgotten. A few days after the appointment, Dr. Rothstein calls her with the results. The MRI is clean, and the blood work is clean, but there's nothing on any of the scans to suggest there's a problem. But a couple of her lymph nodes look slightly enlarged. So the doctor says, hey, it's probably just mono. Go get some rest, drink some fluids, and you'll feel better in a couple weeks. She hangs up the phone and feels her whole body relax. Gets a kind of grace, right? That something is getting diagnosed, and knowing the issue, giving a name to it is sort of calming. She's thinking, okay, so I have mono. That's why I've been tired. That's why I've been off. It's mono. People get mono all the time, and people get over mono. She tells Steven, she tells Angela at work, and everyone is relieved. A week later, the test for mono comes back negative. She doesn't have it. She never had it. So what's wrong with her? It isn't mono. So now it's Friday night in late February, and Steven got tickets to see Ryan Adams at a venue downtown. Stevens has been planning this show for weeks. His sister and her husband are coming too. It's supposed to be a great night. They meet at an Irish pub a few blocks from the venue beforehand. The four of them sit at the booth, and Steven orders fish and chips for the table and a couple beers. The food comes, Susannah looks down at her plate, and her stomach begins to turn. The grease pooling on the paper, the steam coming off the fish. She has to physically turn her head away. She pushes the plate towards the middle of the table and tells the others, I'm not hungry. She tries to make conversation. Steven's sister is asking her something about work, and Susannah can hear the words, but can't quite assemble them into a question fast enough to answer. There's a delay. There's a weird lag, like her brain is buffering. So Steven notices and asks her if she's okay. She nods, yeah, I'm fine, I'm just tired. After the pub, they head to the venue. They get inside, and the room is packed. Steven wants to push toward the front where his sister saved them a spot, and Susannah tries to follow them. But the second they get into the crowd, the room starts to spin. Everything feels too close, everything is too loud, and the stage lights are too bright, and they're overexposing her vision. She grabs Steven's hand and says, I want to stop. So they retreat to the back of the room. There's a structural pillar near the bar, and she leans against it, both hands flat on the wood, trying to steady herself. And at this point, Ryan Adams goes on stage. The whole crowd cheers, and he starts playing, but she doesn't hear it. She's standing in a room, and the music is playing, and she just can't focus on it, like the sound is hitting the beginning of her ear canal and then just stopping there. She can feel the bass hit her chest, and she can feel Steven next to her swaying, but all she registers is noise. She stands against the pillar the entire concert. Afterward, in the cab ride home, Steven is in a great mood. He's kind of buzzed, and he's like, wasn't that incredible? What do you think? She opens her mouth to answer, but nothing comes out. She can't remember the concert. She was just there, She was there for 2 hours. She watched him play, and she cannot, for the life of her, recall a single song he performed. She can't recall anything from the show. Nothing. Kind of like a dream you wake up from. You can remember you had it, but when someone asks you to tell them about it, you can't. So she just makes something up. She says, "Yeah, Steven, it was great." She started to really get scared about what was happening to her. For the first time in any of this, she feels real cold fear. Because forgetting a meeting is one thing, but forgetting a concert you literally just attended is something else. Her memory was not working. She doesn't tell anyone. She stays in her head with this feeling. And when she gets home, she brushes her teeth, she crawls into bed next to Steven, and stares at the ceiling for a long time. Something is wrong, and it's getting worse. Now it's Tuesday morning. Steve, the Sunday editor at the Post, calls her into his office. He has a really good assignment for her. He wants her to interview John Walsh. John Walsh is the host of America's Most Wanted, and if you don't know, his son was abducted and murdered when he was just a child. And John Walsh built his entire life and career around catching fugitives. So an interview with him is the kind of thing reporters dream of. And Steve gives to her as a vote of confidence even after the missed meeting. "Get me a great piece," he says. And she says, "Yes, of course." She says yes. The interview is later that week, and she's walking down the long hallway at the Post towards the conference room where Walsh is waiting, and the walls begin to breathe. In and out, the framed newspapers hung along the hallway on either side are pulsing gently, kind of like lungs. The ceiling above her stretches upward taller and taller until the hallways feel like they're towering above her. Her own footsteps sounding further and further away. But she's not afraid. That's the strangest part of this, right? She notices what's happening and decides to detach from the feeling, and she just keeps walking. She can't mess this up, right? Her heart is racing, but she keeps walking down the cavernous hallway towards the door at the end. She walks into the room, and John Walsh stands up to greet her. The interview is a disaster. She can't keep up with him. He's talking about drug cartels, about smuggling routes, about a case he's working on, and she's just nodding along, trying to take notes, but the notes aren't making sense. She loses the thread of his sentences halfway through, and she laughs loudly at a comment he makes that wasn't a joke. His publicist sitting in the corner gives her a long look. After about 20 minutes, the publicist stands up and says, "All right, we're done here." Walsh shakes her hand politely, and they leave. Susannah offers to walk them out, and she gets up, she takes a step and bumps into the wall. She apologizes, and she tries to open the conference room door, and her hand misses the handle by almost a foot. This would be her last interview for months to come. The next morning is a cold, clear March day. She forces herself to go to work. She walks east towards Midtown, and she has to cross through Times Square to get there. I'm sure a lot of you have been to Times Square and you know what it looks like. Billboards stacked 30 feet high, screens the same size as the buildings, every surface flashing with lights, color, and motion. And the lights are just vibrating. The colors on the billboards are loud, the whole visual field humming. She's starting to feel sick, but she makes it to the office. She slides into her seat. Angela takes one look at her and says, "What's wrong with you?" And Susannah leans over and whispers like she knows what she's about to say isn't quite right. The lights in Times Square, they're vibrating. And Susannah bursts into tears. She is sobbing at her desk in the middle of the Post newsroom with no warning. She doesn't know why. The crying is happening to her. She's saying things, "I'm bad at my job, Steven doesn't love me, I'm crazy and stupid." And none of it is true, and she knows none of it is true, but she can't stop saying it. And a coworker walks by and says, "Are you okay?" And Susannah shouts at her to leave her alone. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the crying stopped, and she's happy. She is suddenly electric, buzzing with happiness. She's laughing through her tears, she's wiping them off her face, and she tells Angela brightly that everything is going to be okay. She gets up, walks across the newsroom to find Paul, her mentor, the guy who actually got her the internship in the first place, and this guy was worried about her for weeks. She finds him at his desk and asks him if he wants to come outside for a smoke. In the elevator on the way down, she's talking too fast, bouncing on her heels, telling him that she's full of energy, she's got ideas, she wants to start working on bigger stories, hard-hitting investigations, like real journalism. And Paul is watching her face and listening, and the more she talks, the more concerned he's getting. They get to the sidewalk, he lights a cigarette, and he turns to her and asks, "Susannah, have you talked to your mom recently?" She looks at him and says, "Nah, she's fine, she's never been better." He goes back inside 10 minutes later and immediately calls Angela. Something is very wrong with her. We have to call her mother. And that night, Stephen comes over to Susannah's apartment with groceries. He's gonna make her dinner. She watches him chop garlic. She watches him put the pasta in boiling water. He's talking and she's nodding, and somewhere underneath the surface of her face, something is happening that even she doesn't understand. He sets the plate of pasta in front of her and she can barely look at it. She doesn't eat. She chain smokes by the window and he asks her gently, like if she's been sleeping. She says no, so he turns on the TV and lies down on the couch and he falls asleep first. Stephen wakes up to the sound of low, wet moans coming from beside him on the couch. He rolls over and sees his girlfriend sitting upright, eyes wide open, devoid of life, and her body locked rigid. He says, wake up, what's happening?" And suddenly her arms whip straight out in front of her like she's reaching for something. Her body goes into convulsions. Blood and foam are now coming out of her mouth. And panicking, Stephen calls 911. She wakes up on a gurney in the ER. Stephen is next to her, holding her hand. His eyes are red. He's been awake since the seizure. He rode in the ambulance with her, watched the paramedics work on her, sat in this curtained-off bay for hours until she came back to herself. She turns her head towards him, and the first thing she says is, "I think I'm dying." She tells him she has melanoma. The melanoma she had years ago came back. That's what's been wrong with her. That's why everything has been so strange. The MRI tech who was chatting her up at Dr. Bailey's office didn't catch it. And Stephen's now crying. He tells her she doesn't have melanoma, but he doesn't know that. He just tells her anyways. An ER doctor pulls back the curtain, and Susannah demands to be moved to a different room. So the doctor agrees. Susannah holds Stephen's hand as the bed gets wheeled down the corridor, and she feels powerful somehow. She has her boyfriend, she thinks she's dying, and she's gonna make sure that the doctor knows this. The ER doctor comes back a few minutes later with paperwork. He's discharging her. Stephen stares at him like, "What? She just had a seizure. You can't just send her home." And the doctor explains that first seizures are actually very common. Most are isolated events and nothing turns up. He recommends she follow up with the neurologist within the week. He hands them the paperwork and tells them that he needs the bed. Stephen is absolutely distraught, and Susannah is suddenly back to herself again. She's soft, she's apologetic, worried about being a nuisance. She tells Stephen not to call her mom, that she'll just worry, and I don't want her to worry. Stephen calls her mom anyways. This is going to become a pattern, by the way. Susan's personality is going to flicker on and off like a faulty light bulb for the next 2 weeks. 1 minute, she's screaming at strangers in a hospital corridor, and the next, she's the daughter who doesn't want her mother to lose sleep. The illness is not erasing her in one clean stroke, it's wiping her out in flashes. And in between the flashes, the real Susannah keeps surfacing, briefly before going under again. This is what makes it so hard for everyone around her to know how scared to be. The next morning, her mother and her stepfather Alan drive in from New Jersey at 6 a.m. Now, if you couldn't tell from Susannah's claims, her mom is a worrier. Mom is the kind of person who keeps notebooks and makes lists and asks doctors a lot of questions. Mom is also very afraid of cancer. Susannah's previous melanoma scared her badly, so when she walks into Susannah's apartment that morning and finds her daughter pacing the studio talking about being sick, her mom's instinct is, this is bad and we are taking her home with us. But Susannah doesn't want to go. She fights them that this apartment is hers. This is the entire architecture of her independence, her adulthood. Proof that she's a real person living a real life in the city that she's worked so hard for. Going back to her mother's house in New Jersey feels like being demoted to a child, but she's outnumbered. Stephen agrees with her parents and Alan is already loading her bags into the car. She's too tired to keep arguing, so she gets in the back seat. They drive west across the river out of Manhattan into the suburbs. That weekend in New Jersey, she has more seizures. Smaller ones. Strange ones. She'll be sitting on the couch and just go away for 30 seconds, staring into a void, smack her lips, and then come back mid-sentence like nothing happened. Her mom calls Dr. Bailey on Monday morning and demands an emergency appointment. So they go back. Dr. Bailey runs another exam, reflexes, coordination, the little flashlight in the eye, and again, everything is normal. He looks at Susannah's chart and looks at her and he frowns. He asks her about her drinking. She tells him the truth. She has on average 2 glasses of wine a night, sometimes a little more on a weekend. And honestly, it's kind of standard for a 24-year-old in New York, but he writes it down. What Susannah doesn't know is that doctors are trained to assume patients underreport their drinking. So Dr. Bailey writes down what he thinks is her real consumption. He doubles it, and then he doubles it again. By the time Susannah leaves his office that day, the chart says that she drinks 2 bottles of wine per night. The single line in her medical record is going to follow her for the next 2 weeks. Every doctor who sees her is going to read it. Every doctor who sees her is going to factor it in. But it's completely wrong. But it's now part of her file. Dr. Bailey turns to her mom and says, Susannah is partying too hard. And she's working too hard. She's not sleeping. The seizures were alcohol related. She needs to slow down. He hands Susannah a prescription for anti-seizure medication, just in case, and he refers her to a psychiatrist. Mother is exhausted and desperate for any explanation. She takes the prescription and feels relieved. The psychiatrist Dr. Bailey refers her to is a woman named Dr. Sarah Levin. The appointment is the next day, and Susannah seems excited. She has a self-diagnosis that she is really excited to deliver. She sits down in Dr. Levin's office and tells her with confidence, I have bipolar disorder. She lays out her case, the mood swings at the office, the crying turns laughter. She's been doing some Googling and she reads about famous people who have bipolar disorder. Jim Carrey, Mark Twain, Beethoven. Because if she has bipolar disorder, then she is simply a tortured creative. She's still herself, just with a label that she can live with. Dr. Levin listens and says, okay, you have bipolar disorder. Specifically, a mixed episode, manic symptoms and depressive symptoms at the same time. She prescribes antipsychotic medication and tells Susannah to come back in a week. Now, while Susannah is in with Dr. Levin, her mother is in the waiting room and her mother is on the phone with her son, James, Susannah's younger brother, who's away at college. And mom is updating him. She tells him what Dr. Bailey said about the partying. She tells him what Dr. Levin is probably about to say about bipolar disorder. And she asks him, does that sound right to you? And 19-year-old James says, no, that's not Susannah. He doesn't believe she's a partier. He doesn't believe she has bipolar disorder. He says he doesn't know what's wrong with her, but it's not this. And mom doesn't believe it either, but she has nothing else. So she takes the antipsychotics home and gives them to her daughter. Everyone goes to bed, and now it's the middle of the night, and Susannah has an epiphany. It's the medications. That's what's making her sick. She's only been on the anti-seizure pill for 1 day, but she is certain that the pill is taking over her body. She has to get it out. She goes to the bathroom and tries to make herself throw up, but she hasn't eaten anything in 2 days. There's nothing to bring up. Susannah climbs to the stairs to the 3rd floor. She walks to her mom's bedside. She starts standing over her sleeping mother in the dark, watching her breathe, and then she reaches down and starts stroking her mother's hair. This wakes mom up, but she doesn't panic. She just gently takes her daughter's hand and walks her back downstairs and tucks her into the guest bed and strokes her hair until Susannah falls quiet. But Susannah does not sleep. The next day, she has another seizure, a bad one. She's standing in the living room mid-sentence, announcing to her mother and her stepfather that she has decided to break up with Steven, quit her job, and leave New York. And then she's on the floor. She bites down on her own tongue so hard that blood sprays across the carpet. Alan tries to pry her jaw open to keep her from choking on it, and she bites his finger, drawing blood from him too. It lasts for maybe a minute, and she comes back to consciousness with her mother already on the phone with Dr. Bailey demanding an emergency EEG to measure her brain's electrical activity. The EEG is the next morning. Steven has now come out from the city to be with her. Alan drives the family to the appointment, and Suzanne and Steven sit in the back seat. Halfway to their destination, Suzanne hears Alan in the front seat call her a slut. But Alan didn't call her that. He actually hadn't been saying anything for a few minutes. She unbuckles her seatbelt and tries to open the car door at 50 miles an hour on a highway. Stephen lunges across the back seat and grabs her around the waist before she can open the door. Mom's screaming while Alan jerks the wheel and pulls over to the shoulder. Stephen is holding Susannah down, his voice shaking. "This isn't okay, Susannah, this isn't okay." She fights him for a while and then she goes still. They drive the rest of the way in silence. At the appointment now, the EEG technician glues a webbing of electrodes to Susannah's scalp and runs her through breathing exercises and strobe light tests for over 15 minutes. When it's over, the technician removes the electrodes and tells her, "Don't worry, there's nothing wrong, sweetheart. It's all in your head. You're just stressed." This is going to turn out to be one of the most accurate statements anyone says to Susannah in this entire story. It is almost word for word what's actually happening, just not in the way that the technician means. That night, Susannah stays at her father's house in Brooklyn. Now, her dad, you'll remember, is the private one, married to Giselle, who Susannah doesn't know that well. Before Susannah got sick, she and her dad were on okay terms. They were friendly, but not really close. He wasn't the parent she leaned on, and in a few hours, this will become the most important night of his life. They have dinner. Susannah can't eat. She pushes the plate away and watches Giselle and her father eat in silence. And then she hears Giselle say very clearly, "You're a spoiled brat." Susannah whips her head up and says, "What did you say?" Giselle blinks, very confused. I didn't say anything." Susannah looks at her father and then back at Giselle, and then her heart starts pounding. After dinner, Susannah asks her father to sit with her in the den. She's scared, and she tells him she doesn't know why. He sits with her, and they talk for a while, and then abruptly, she yells at him to get out. He leaves the room. 5 minutes later, she calls him back in. He comes back, they talk again. She yells at him again to leave. He leaves again, and this goes on in a loop for hours. Somewhere in the middle of it, she says something to make her father cry. He is not a man who cries. After he leaves the room for the final time, Suzanne lies alone in the dark on the daybed, and then she hears pounding. Pounding coming from upstairs, from her father and Giselle's room. She sits up, and then she hears Giselle's voice pleading, "Please, please don't." Susannah understands with absolute certainty what is happening. Her father is upstairs, beating Giselle to death. She slides off her daybed and onto the floor, and she crawls to the doorway, listening to the pounding continue. She thinks she's next. He's gonna kill Giselle, and then he's gonna come downstairs, and he's going to kill me too. She gets to her feet, and she stumbles into the bathroom and locks the door. She climbs onto the toilet and tries to open the bathroom window, getting ready to jump out of a second story onto concrete. It didn't matter, she had to get out. But then she sees a small Buddha figurine on the bathroom shelf. It catches her attention, and she stares longingly at this Buddha as if it's saying to her, "Everything is going to be okay." She climbs down off the toilet, and she sits on the bathroom floor and waits. None of what she heard was real. There was no pounding. Giselle was not pleading. Her father was not upstairs killing his wife. He was upstairs in the bedroom next to hers, listening through the wall, terrified because he had heard his daughter trying to break out the window in the bathroom. He had quietly gotten up and stood in the dark and listened to her panic, not wanting to startle her, wanting to wait for the right moment to talk her down. And when she came out of the bathroom, he sat with her until dawn. In the morning, Mom arrives, and Susannah runs out of the house and throws herself into her mother's car and tells her her father tried to kidnap her, and that her father tried to kill her, and that her father's a murderer. And her father stands on the front steps and just watches. Her parents have been divorced for 8 years, and they're barely able to stay in the same room together, but they get on the phone with each other that morning and they make a decision together. Susannah needs to be hospitalized tonight. Not a psych ward, but whatever this is, both of them in their gut do not believe it's a mental illness. They want her in a real hospital, a neurology floor with real doctors and real machines, so they take her back to Dr. Bailey one last time. In Dr. Bailey's office, with Susan sitting quietly between them, Mom and Alan demand that he admit her to a hospital. Dr. Bailey looks at the chart on his desk, and he looks at Suzanne with a normal MRI, blood work, EEG, and a normal exam, and he tells them, with the confidence of a man who has been right his entire career, that what Susannah has is not a hospital problem. He tells them this is alcohol withdrawal. The 2 glasses of wine he turned into 2 bottles 3 weeks ago, he is now using to explain everything. The seizures, the hallucinations, the paranoia, the screaming on the highway the night at her father's house. She just needs to stop drinking. She needs to take her medications and she'll be fine. Now, Mom, quiet, polite mom, who works at the DA's office and keeps notebooks and makes lists, leans forward and tells Dr. Bailey very evenly that she hadn't had a drink in over a week. She and Alan had made a pact in the parking lot before they came. They're not leaving this office without an admission. She lists Susannah's symptoms, she names them one by one, and she's reading from a witness statement. The seizures, insomnia, the paranoia, the hallucinations, the fact that her daughter just tried to jump out of a moving car yesterday afternoon, the fact that her daughter believes her own father is a murderer. Dr. Bailey looks at her and then he gets up, walks out of the office, and makes a phone call. He comes back a few minutes later and tells them that there's a bed open at NYU. An advanced epilepsy monitoring unit, 24-hour video EEG, a nurse in the room at all times, and Mom can take her there now. They drive across the river to NYU, and her mom checks in at the front desk. Susannah is calm. She looks around the lobby and tells her mother that she'd like to get a coffee before they go upstairs. Mom hesitates, but then nods. Go ahead, sweetie. I'll wait for you here. Susannah walks across the marble lobby toward the coffee cart by the entrance, and she makes it about 10 feet. Then her body goes rigid, her eyes roll back, and she collapses onto the floor of the NYU hospital lobby. The morning after their daughter is admitted, Dad takes the subway from Brooklyn to Manhattan and walks a few blocks to NYU. He has not slept. He has been awake since 2 nights ago when his daughter barricaded herself in his bathroom and tried to jump out of a second-story window because she believed he was upstairs killing his wife. He heads to the 12th floor at NYU. It's the Advanced Epilepsy Monitoring Unit. It's where they put patients whose seizures are bad enough and strange enough that they need to be watched around the clock, on camera. There's a nurse in every room 24 hours a day. There's video EEG monitoring her brain's electrical activity in real time, looking for a rhythm of a seizure. He gets off the elevator and he asks the desk for his daughter's room. A nurse takes him down the hallway, opens the door, and lets him in. His daughter is sitting up in a hospital bed in a paper gown. There is a webbing of wires glued to her scalp running down behind her bed into a small machine. There's an IV in her arm. There's a security guard sitting in a chair near the door, which means something has already happened that he doesn't know yet. Susannah looks at him and she screams. She screams at the nurse to get him out. Get him out. He's not my father. He's not my father. The nurse moves towards her dad, gently, hand on his elbow, already backing out of the room. He stands in the hallway listening to his daughter scream on the other side of the door, and he understands that's something he did not understand last night. She believes he is not her father. He sits down on a bench in the hallway across from her room and he puts a paperback book on his lap. He opens it. He will sit on this bench every day, all day, for the next 30 days. She has been diagnosed by a night shift neurologist with something called Capgras syndrome. People with Capgras become convinced that someone close to them, usually a parent or a spouse, has been replaced. The face is right, the voice is right, the mannerisms are right, but the person in some essential way is not them. It's an imposter. I put a video in the cards here if you want to hear more stories on Capgras syndrome. Doctors believe Capgras is caused by damage to a specific part of the brain, the part that connects facial recognition to emotional memory. You can see your father's face, you just can't feel that it's him. The neurologist who writes Capgras in Susannah's chart prescribes an antipsychotic that night. Dr. Deborah Russo is the attending neurologist on the epilepsy floor. She's been doing this a long time. She walks into Susannah's room with her clipboard ready to do her exam. And she gets about 3 questions in when Susannah cuts her off. She leans forward in the bed, eyes wide open, and she tells Dr. Russo, "The people on the TV are saying things about me." Dr. Russo glances at the TV and it's off. Susannah goes on, the TV anchors, her coworkers at the Post, they're all talking about her, spreading rumors, making sure that she knows. Dr. Russo takes notes. Susannah suddenly leaps off her bed. She rips the IV line out of her arm and she runs for the door. 2 nurses catch her in the hallway and she fights them. She's screaming. She is 24 years old and 120 pounds, and she is fighting 2 grown adults like her life depends on it. They get her back into the room. They strap her wrist to the bed. Dr. Russo writes in the chart, Postictal psychosis. That's the diagnosis. Psychotic behavior following seizures. She prescribes more antipsychotic medication. She walks out of the room, Dad on his bench in the hallway, and he looks up at her and says quietly, "She thinks I'm not her father." Dr. Russo nods and she has nothing to tell him. Now, Dr. Ian Arslan is a psychopharmacologist. He looks more like an old hippie than a doctor. He is the fourth specialist to enter Susannah's case. He interviews her parents at length. He calls Dr. Bailey, the original neurologist, who tells him that Susannah has been drinking 2 bottles of wine a night. And Dr. Arslan writes in his notes, Postictal psychosis, possibly schizoaffective disorder. He does not share the schizoaffective possibility with Susannah's parents. He doesn't want to scare them. So now in the chart, Susannah has been diagnosed in 7 days with Capgras syndrome, postictal psychosis, unspecified mood disorder, unspecified psychotic disorder, bipolar disorder, dissociative identity disorder, and schizoaffective disorder. 7 labels, and none of them explaining anything, and none of them are right. And while the doctors are stacking labels on top of drugs, Susannah is doing the only thing her brain seems capable of doing. She's plotting her escape. She tries 3 times that first week. Each time the nurse catches her in the hallway, each time they bring her back, each time the chart gets a new note. Patient continues to be a flight risk. After the 3rd escape attempt, a nurse pulls Tom aside in the hallway and she tells him gently, if she keeps trying to leave, we're going to have to move her. He asks where, and she tells him the psychiatric ward. He understands what this means, that they will be managing her behavior with medication until she is stable enough to be released. And given how she's presenting right now, she will not be stable enough to be released for a long time. That night, her dad goes home and he begins writing in his journal. He writes, I have to be there. If I'm not there, they will move her. And the next morning, he is on that bench by 7 a.m. with a thicker book. Now, Stephen has been coming every evening after he gets off of work. He stays until midnight and the nurses let him stay past visiting hours because they've noticed something. When Stephen is in the room, Susannah doesn't try to escape. She's much calmer with him there, not lucid, but calmer. She holds his hand, she watches him the way a child watches a parent. Sometimes when he's sitting next to her on her bed, she falls asleep, which she doesn't do for anyone else. On his second night, Stephen looks at her and he's not been sleeping either. He's about 20 pounds lighter than he was a month ago, and his band stopped rehearsing. She turned to him and said quietly, if you don't want to come back, I understand. And she meant it. Behind whatever was happening to her, she's offering her boyfriend an exit. They've been together for 4 months, but he tells her, I'm not going anywhere. The second week is when the psychosis starts to fade, which sounds like good news, but it's not good news. What replaces the psychosis is nothing. Almost nothing. Susannah stops screaming at her father. She stops trying to escape. She stops accusing the nurses of plotting against her. She also stops talking and almost completely stops moving. She slurs her words when she tries to speak. Her tongue starts to hang out of her mouth when she's tired, and she lets it just sit there on her lower lip like she's forgotten it belongs to her. She makes chewing motions for no reason, and she holds her arms stiff, straight out in front of her. She stares at a single point on a wall for hours at a time. Dr. Arslan, the hippie psychopharmacologist, examines her on day 12 and writes this in her chart. For the first time, the patient is exhibiting signs of catatonia. Catatonia is the body of a person whose brain has gone offline, so the doctors order a spinal tap. The spinal tap is the first test that finds something. When they pull cerebrospinal fluid out of her spine and analyze it, they find an elevated white blood cell count, which is a sign of infection or inflammation, but something is happening inside her brain that is causing her immune system to go into emergency mode. Mom asks Dr. Siegel what this means. He tells her it means she's not crazy. It means that there's something physically wrong with her. And for the first time in 2 months since the bedbugs, since the missed meeting, since Dr. Bailey's office, someone in a white coat has said the words that Mom has been waiting to hear. She bursts into tears in the hallway, but they still don't know what it is. The white blood cell count tells them where to look inside the brain, but not what they're looking for. They run more tests, infection panels, autoimmune panels, cancer markers, heavy metal panels, anything that could possibly cause inflammation in the brain. Everything comes back negative. For a few days, Dr. Siegel pulls Mom aside in the hallway and tells her gently that he's no longer the lead doctor on Susannah's case, and Mom's hurt. Mom liked Dr. Siegel, and she asks why. He tells her because we can't figure out what's wrong. But there's a doctor on the floor who's better than I am at figuring out what's wrong. Dr. Suhail Najjar. He tells her that she will meet him in a few days. He tells her that if anyone in the hospital can find out what is happening to your daughter, it's him. Now, Dr. Siegel called Dr. Najjar 3 days ago, and his colleagues call him, half-jokingly, the real-life Dr. House. Dr. Najjar has read Susannah's chart cover to cover, and he has read every diagnosis the 7 other doctors have assigned her. He has read Dr. Bailey's notes about the alcohol and makes a small mark next to it that says unverified. He's read about the bedbugs, the numb hand, the first seizures on Stephen's couch, the Capgras delusion, the escape attempts, the spinal tap, the elevated white blood cells, and he thinks he knows what's wrong with her, but he has to see her first. Dr. Najjar walks into the room and Mom is there, and actually Dad's there. He's actually been allowed in the room ever since the psychosis subsided. Dr. Najjar introduces himself and asks if he can sit down. He pulls a chair up to the side of the bed, and then he does something that no other doctor has done in 20 days. He turns to Susannah and he speaks to her directly. "Hello, Susannah. My name is Dr. Najjar. I'm gonna try to help you." She doesn't really respond. Her eyes drift towards him and her tongue is still hanging out, but Najjar speaks to her like she's in there, somewhere listening. He goes through her medical history piece by piece and asks about everything. There are details no other doctor really cared about, but Najjar is treating them like clues. Then he leans forward and he pulls off a piece of paper from his clipboard and then a pen out of his pocket. He sets them in front of her on the bed tray and he says, "Susannah, I would like you to draw for me a clock. Just a circle with the numbers around it, just the way a clock face looks." She looks at the paper and it takes her a long time, but she picks up the pen with her right hand and her hand shakes for a few seconds before it figures out how to grip it, and then she draws a circle. Sort of, it's a wobbly circle, it's a little lopsided, but it's a circle. She then starts placing the numbers. She writes a 12 at the top, she writes a 1 next to it, a 2, a 3, a 4, and so on. She writes all the correct numbers. She finishes, she sets down the pen, and she looks up in the jar. To Susannah, the clock looks complete. The clock has all 12 numbers. She does not see anything wrong with what she has drawn. Najjar looks at the clock, and all the numbers are on the right-facing side of the clock. Then he looks at her parents, and he says quietly, "Her brain is on fire." That is the line that is going to follow Susannah Cahalan for the rest of her life. The 4 words a neurologist says to her parents in a hospital room during a month she will not remember. Her brain is on fire. And he means it literally. He explains that something is causing the right hemisphere of her brain to inflame, to swell, to stop functioning correctly. The seizures, the hallucinations, the paranoia, the catatonia, the Capgras delusion, every single symptom Susannah has had over the last 2 months traces back to her brain being inflamed, like it's on fire. So, Dr. Najjar takes Susannah's hands in his, and he looks her in the face and he tells her that he is going to do everything in his power to help her. And Susannah, still drooling, still catatonic, somehow leans forward and throws her arms around him and cries. Mom and Dad are watching this from the foot of the bed. The thing that finally cracks the case after 7 doctors in 3 weeks and over $1 million in tests is a piece of paper, a pen, and a question a kindergartner could answer. Dr. Najjar tells them what he thinks needs to happen next. He needs to do a brain biopsy. He needs to drill a small hole into their daughter's skull, take a piece of her brain and send it to a lab. Specifically, to a lab in Philadelphia run by a doctor named Giuseppe Dalmau. Dr. Najjar suspects what is wrong with Susannah and he wants Dalmau to confirm it. If he's right, the brain biopsy will give them the diagnosis. If he is right, she might recover. So Dad agrees to the biopsy and Mom agrees too. The next morning, an orderly comes into Susannah's hospital room with a wheelchair. They shave a small patch of her hair on the side of her head and they wheel her down to the surgical floor. A surgeon takes 4 hours to drill through her skull to remove a piece of her brain. The piece goes into a small specimen jar. The specimen jar gets put into a cooler, and the cooler gets driven that afternoon from Manhattan to Philadelphia to the lab of Dr. Zusep Dalmau. A few days later, the tests come back. Dr. Najjar gets a call in his office. He listens for a while, and he hangs up the phone. He walks down the hallway to Susannah's room where Mom, Dad, Stephen, they're all waiting. He steps inside and he closes the door behind him. And he tells them the name of the disease. Anti-NMDA receptor autoimmune encephalitis. It means her own immune system has been attacking her brain, specifically attacking a tiny structure on the surface of her brain cells called NMDA receptor. The NMDA receptor is one of the things that lets your brain cells talk to each other. It's involved in memory and learning and mood and personality in the entire experience of being a person. But for Susannah, for some strange reason, her body decided that one day in late January that the NMDA receptors in her brain were a foreign invader, and it's been trying to destroy them ever since. This is why she threw away her clippings. This is why she snooped through Stephen's emails. This is why the walls breathed and Times Square vibrated and her father turned into a murderer. Her immune system was attacking her brain. So Dr. Najjar tells them that she is the 217th person on Earth to ever be diagnosed with this disease. Dr. Najjar tells them that there is a treatment, but it won't be easy. It's going to involve flooding her body with healthy donor antibodies to neutralize the rogue ones. And it's going to involve filtering her blood through a machine to wash the bad antibodies out. And it's going to involve heavy steroids to bring down the inflammation in her brain. But if it works, she should return to roughly 90% of who she was before. And Mom looks at him and says, 90%? He nods. So they start the treatment that afternoon. Susannah does not know what is happening. She does not know that somewhere on a desk in Philadelphia, a tiny piece of her brain is in a specimen jar with her last name on it. She is very far away. But for the first time in 2 months, there is something in her bloodstream that is fighting for her. The treatment works. Not all at once, but slowly. Over days and then weeks, Susannah Cahalan starts coming back to herself the same way she felt, but in pieces. About a week after the diagnosis, Najjar tells her parents that she's well enough to leave the hospital. They drive her back home to her childhood bedroom. She has to take her medications 6 times a day and she cannot keep track. So her mother sets out the pills in little dishes and reminds her every few hours what to take. She hates this. She hates the dishes. She hates being a passenger in her mother's car. She hates that her brother James, now home from college, is the one driving her around. She is in some real way a teenager again. The apartment, the post, the boyfriend's bed, the cab rides at 2 a.m., all of it taken from her and replaced with her mother's hand on her shoulder, reminding her to swallow. And after all of it, the question she can't answer, who is she going to be on the other side of this? So now by August, she is well enough to go back to work part-time. In September, Steve, the Sunday editor, the one she forgot the meeting with 7 months ago, calls her into his office. He has an assignment for her. He wants her to write a first-person piece about what happened, the whole thing, and he gives her 3 days. She walks back to her desk, she opens a Word document, and she realizes sitting there that she doesn't actually know what happened to her. She remembers everything up until the seizure on Stephen's couch, the bedbugs, the breathing walls, the vibrating billboards, the Buddha figurine on the bathroom shelf. But after that seizure, throughout the entire month at NYU, she remembers almost nothing. She remembers some hallucinations vividly. There was an eye watching her through the slit in the bathroom door, an aging psychiatrist whose face got younger the longer she stared at it, and a South American woman whispering in Spanish that she was going to be recorded and that tape was going to be sent to the post. But the actual events of her hospitalization, her father sitting on the bench, Stephen in the hospital bed, Dr. Najjar on the clock test, the brain biopsy, the diagnosis itself, she doesn't remember any of it. So she does the only thing she knows how to do. She reports it. She interviews her mother, Stephen, even her father. He hadn't spoken to anyone about that month since it happened, but he hands her his journal without saying a word. He kept writing in it the whole time while she was in the hospital. Every day, everything he saw, everything he was afraid of. He has not opened it since the day she came home. He tells her that she can read it. He tells her she can use whatever she wants, and he never asks for it back. And then she gets the videotapes. The hospital cameras recorded everything 24 hours a day for the entire month that she was on that 12th floor. The hospital releases the footage to her and she takes the DVDs home and she puts the first one in and she watches herself. She watches a thin, hollow-eyed girl with wires glued to her scalp pace the room. She watches the girl rip out an IV out of her own arm, and then she watches the girl pick up a TV remote and speak into it like a microphone, accusing strangers of telling lies about her. She does not recognize the girl on the screen. She knows it's her, but the woman on the screen isn't anyone she's ever met. She has no emotional memory of being that person, but she watches the tape for hours. She watches them again and again, and somewhere around 2 a.m, sitting on the floor of her parents' den, with her hand over her mouth, she understands something. She will spend the rest of her life trying to put it into words. That girl on the tape is undoubtedly her, and her brain is the one that did all of that. Whatever line she thought existed between Susannah and not Susannah is much thinner than she would ever know. She writes the article in 3 days, and it runs in the New York Post on October 4th, 2009. The headline, "My Mysterious Lost Month of Madness." Within a week, her inbox is overflowing. People who think they have the same disease, people whose daughters have it, people whose sons, their sisters, their wives, their best friends, people whose loved ones have already died, and even people who are undiagnosed or committed to psychiatric institutions, locked away as schizophrenic, read her article and recognize every single symptom. She sits at her desk reading these emails and she feels her whole understanding of her own story shift under her, because she's been thinking that this whole time that what's happened to her was a freak accident, a medical mystery, a 1 in a million catastrophe, but it's not. It's happening right now, today, all over the country, to people who are being misdiagnosed and locked up and forgotten. So she decides she needs to know how many. So she starts making calls. The first thing she learns is most basic and the most unsettling. Her disease, anti-NMDA receptor autoimmune encephalitis, was only formally identified in 2007. 2 years before she got sick. That's the entire history of the diagnosis at the time of her own immune system starting to attack her brain. A man named Dr. Joseph Dalmau, working at the University of Pennsylvania, had been studying a small group of women who all came in with the same baffling profile: hallucinations, memory loss, seizures, psychiatric symptoms, and he discovered their bodies were producing antibodies against the NMDA receptors on their own brain cells. The disease was named in 2007 and he published the paper. By the time Susannah got sick in early 2009, the entire medical literature on her condition consisted of a few journal articles and a few hundred diagnosed cases worldwide. She is patient number 217. So Susannah, as a reporter, asked the obvious next question. She asked Dalmau, she asked Najjar, she asked every neurologist who will get on the phone with her. If the disease was only named in 2007, what was happening to people before that? And that answer changes everything. The disease did not start in 2007. The disease has almost certainly been around as long as human beings have had brains and immune systems. Doctors have been seeing it for decades, centuries, maybe longer. They just didn't know what they were looking for. In 1949, a 14-year-old boy in Maryland began behaving strangely. He had seizures, he had hallucinations, his personality changed overnight, he spoke in a voice that was not his own. He twisted his body into postures that should not have been possible. He became unrecognizable. The doctors couldn't help him, so the Catholic Church was called in. The boy was subject to an exorcism, multiple exorcisms, over periods of weeks. The Jesuit priests who performed the rites kept detailed notes, and those notes were later given to a young writer named William Peter Blatty. Blatty turned the story into a novel. That novel became The Exorcist. Dr. Najjar tells Susannah at the time she was diagnosed, his best estimate was about 90% of people with her disease were being missed. 9 out of 10. She also calls Dr. Bailey, the grandfatherly neurologist with the marble lobby floor, and the man who told her twice that her tests were normal, the man who turned 2 glasses of wine into 2 bottles in her chart. She tells him what she eventually was diagnosed with, and there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Dr. Bailey has never heard of it. Susannah got lucky. She had a mother who refused to let the hospital send her to a psychiatric ward. She had a father who sat on the bench outside her hospital room every day for 4 weeks. She had a boyfriend of 4 months who decided to stay. She had insurance. She had a neurologist on staff who happened to know about a paper Dalmau had published 2 years earlier. If any one of those things had been different, Susannah Cahalan would not have written the article, and she would not have written her book. She would almost certainly have died in a psychiatric institution, listed in some chart as another tragic case of early onset schizophrenia, and nobody would have ever known. This is the part that haunts her. Not what happened to her, what happened to all the other ones who didn't get what she had. A meaningful percentage of them were not insane. Their brains were on fire, and nobody knew how to put it out. Thank you for watching this video. If you want to hear more of history's mysteries or life's disturbing discoveries, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. If you got any weird stories you want to share, leave them down in the comments. I will see you in the next one. Bye.